Hello everyone, my name is Pally and I'm an OG 2016 DBD nerd who mains Trapper and Bill, although I do enjoy a wee bit of the singularity sometimes if he wasn't bugged at the time of recording this. But then again, so is Trapper, along with 80% of the killer roster. What even is this patch? Anyway, today I want to talk about the upcoming Five Nights at Freddy's chapter in Dead by Daylight. But before I do that, I want to preface this by saying that unless I'm quoting an actual reliable source, everything I'm saying here is speculation and prediction. I could very well be wrong. I just happen to believe that with my background in marketing over the last, I don't know, almost 2 decades, the writing is on the wall. Now, let's be honest. Five Nights at Freddy's is the single most hyped chapter since the original Resident Evil chapter in 2021. Actually, to be honest, as a professional marketing guy myself, I'm not trying to flex, I promise, I'd say that BHVR announcing this chapter nearly a year in advance and letting the hype build made FNAF the most hyped chapter in DBD history, even surpassing Resident Evil. Aside from maybe Jason Voorhees himself from Friday the 13th, Springtrap has been the single most requested killer throughout the community in the entire history of Dead by Daylight. And not only that, but the amount of new players Five Nights at Freddy's is gonna bring to DBD is huge. It's projected to be a massive resurgence for the DBD player base if BHVR can make it stick, if they can retain the players. However, that brings me to the first possible problem that could doom Springtrap to being one of the most hated killers in DBD, at least for a while. And I ain't talking about jump scares. Now I'll start off by saying this. If you were here for the release of Wesker, Project W, or even recently, the release of Kaneki, you know exactly what I'm about to say. Although I remember it being a lot more of a quote problem, if you even want to call it that, with Wesker. We're a month or so into Kaneki's release and I don't really see him around anymore, but Wesker's pick rate, however, was the highest in the game for nearly 6 months. It takes a lot to surpass Huntress. For the first couple of months, killer queues were long, and Wesker was almost the only killer you saw if you played Survivor. It was Wesker by Daylight. It got so bad that oftentimes you saw survivors outright telling killers not to play as Wesker, or even going as far as demanding nerfs for the killer to make them less popular. With the amount of hype and the amount of new players that FNAF is projected to bring to the game, Springtrap is about to be in 90% of Survivor's games for months. Even the current DBD killer players, many of them are dropping their current main killers to main and play Springtrap. That's the first potential issue. He's gonna be everywhere. It's gonna be like that for months. And mark my words, survivors are gonna hate him for it. Although, killer players are usually facing the same pool of 10 perks every game with little to no variation, so one might argue that this goes both ways, but still, it will be dead by Springtrap for a while after launch. However, that's not the only issue I see that will give Springtrap a bad reputation among Survivor players, and none of this is even mentioning the killer queues, which will be an eternity for, well, an eternity. And that's gonna make some killer players hate him too. In a recent interview with Game Rant, killer designer Jason Guzzo, I think I'm pronouncing that right, I'm part Italian, that's how we would pronounce it, was asked about the kind of player he thought would enjoy Springtrap, and his answer was, "You're gonna hate my answer for this because it might sound generic, but I promise you it's not as generic as it seems. I think it'll appeal to most killer players because we found this space where different playstyles, projectile players, chase players, melee players, they can all find ways to make it work," and I'm assuming he means Springtrap's power. He goes on to say, "Like I said, my goal was to give as many tools as possible. It's the same philosophy we had with Dracula, where you could just play as the wolf the entire game if you wanted. Go nuts. It was the same idea here. I wanted as many types of players as possible to jump in and say, oh, this works for me. And you don't have to use everything at your disposal. If you like playing as a melee character, you don't have to use projectiles or focus on chases or loops. You can explore it however you like." Now you heard that right. He's gonna have a multi-layered and multi-ability power, much like Dracula. He's being designed to appeal to the majority of killer players, which essentially is gonna make him a jack-of-all-trades type killer, again, much like Dracula. From what he said, it's obvious we can expect mobility of some form as well, which is huge in terms of map pressure. The issue is, and I struggle to even call this an issue because I truly don't believe it is, survivors in general tend to hate killers like this. If you frequent the wholesome fun land that is DBD Twitter, DBD Blue Sky, DBD subreddit, the DBD forums, anywhere, basically, or even, hell, probably even the comments to this video, after what I'm about to say, you'll see that the killers that get, for lack of a better word, whined about the most are the killers that have different tools at their disposal to apply pressure, and more times than not, they're the killers that have a lot of mobility. They're the killers that pose a threat to survivors and require, at the risk of sounding very pretentious here, critical thinking to verse. Killers that can't easily be bullied by your average survivor. Now we know that Springtrap is likely going to be just that, a multi-tool of killer powers that can appeal to different playstyles and apply to different situations. Popular among killer players, unpopular among survivor players. Now I want to move on to what I believe to be the biggest and most controversial potential issue I think Springtrap may have. And I hesitate again to even call it an issue because I don't actually think it's a bad thing if what I'm thinking ends up being true. I have theorized for a while that Kaneki was a test from behavior, and you're probably wondering what I mean. Think back to Kaneki's release. He was very powerful and very overtuned, but he had an extremely low skill floor, to the point where people were complaining that he was way too easy for how good he was. And even now, though I think he's in a decent spot, he's still A tier after 2 rounds of nerfs, and while his skill ceiling is higher, he's still got a very low skill floor. Behavior has been very conservative with his changes, and I believe this to be intentional. He's still easy enough for a new player to pick up and do decently well with, even against semi-seasoned survivors depending on the map. I'd even argue that given 50 hours or so of playtime with Kaneki, and a newer player would hold their own against even better players in pubs. Now, of course, I'm not talking like Champions of the Fog comp level survivors, but decent survivors all the same. My theory is that this is by design. My theory is that behavior created and released Kaneki this way to see how far they could push the super casual and new player friendly balancing philosophy that they have admitted to applying to survivors, but for a killer, and essentially see what they could get away with. And I think that after all the changes they've given him, honestly, they've successfully done that. The reason I mention this, the reason I bring this up, is that I believe Springtrap will be given the same treatment. Now again, I could be wrong, but marketing is my job. I've got a degree in media and marketing, and I'm literally a closer for a living. If you don't know what that is, look it up. What I'm saying is, we already know he's going to have a multi-ability and multi-layered power, and if you read the metaphorical room, you'll realize that this is the biggest and most hyped license Behavior has managed to get their hands on in quite some time, and it's going to attract a lot of new players. But the difference between new players coming in for FNAF versus new players coming in for another license is that FNAF players are coming to DBD to play Springtrap. They're not coming to DBD to play Survivor against Springtrap. They've done that already. They've spent the last 11 years since the first FNAF game playing Survivor against Springtrap or the animatronics in some form. They don't care about playing Survivor. This is the first time they've been able to be the animatronic outside of some random 8-bit adaptation. And because of that, whether the community likes it or not, this killer needs to be balanced around the majority of players, which, contrary to popular belief, isn't actually the pandering squad of content creators that is DBD Twitter. It's casual players. Springtrap has to be easy to play and effective without needing to spend thousands or even hundreds of hours to be able to compete with it in pubs. And part of me believes that Behavior knows that. They know that if they release a mid-level killer for a primarily killer-focused audience full of brand new players, the player retention will be very low. They know that killer anxiety is a real thing, and that if new players queue up and feel anxious and stressed, this isn't an audience that will just switch to Survivor. They're just gonna leave, and obviously Behavior doesn't want that. So I feel like because of that, it's possible that you're going to have a lot of unhappy Andes on DBD Twitter demanding nerfs to the killer because of their new player accessibility to strength ratio. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw something with the style and strength somewhat similar to Dracula, but with the skill floor and ease of use you'd find with someone like Chucky. And I'm not going to call this an issue because I truly don't believe this has to be a bad thing. But again, for that reason, I believe the vocal minority is going to have a semi-meltdown if Springtrap ends up being this way. But again, I could be wrong. It just wouldn't make sense to me with my marketing background not to go this route and expect it to be successful. When it comes down to it, historically easy to play killers with a high level of strength often end up hated by a certain vocal subset of the community. You can see that in Chucky even today, and you can see that in Kaneki as well. And you can also observe Behavior shift in balance philosophy with both of these killers because yes, while Chucky was nerfed, he was also then rebuffed to bring his casual player appeal back. And while Kaneki has seen a number of nerfs, he's still very powerful and very easy to play because of how conservative behavior's been with their changes. I personally believe that behavior is starting to see the value in strong killers that are easy to use, which I highly doubt is going to be applied to every future killer, but I think in Springtrap's case, for Springtrap in particular, it's necessary. And if this ends up being true, it's going to be like ripping off a band-aid for the community because behavior is forcing them to adapt rather than just listening to constant cries to have everything gutted, which admittedly, I'll be honest, happens on both sides. Now listen, at the end of the day, the Five Nights at Freddy's chapter, however it goes, is going to be huge for Dead by Daylight. It's hype beyond anything the community has seen in the last 9 years, and as we enter the 10th year of DBD, which is wild to think about, if behavior plays their cards right, this could end up being the resurgence that the game needs. And I personally really hope that it is, because as much as I complain, I love this game. But I want to know what you guys think. Do you think balancing this killer for the new player experience is the way to do it? Do you like the fact that he's confirmed to have a multi-ability power like Dracula? Let me know in the comments below. On a personal note, I apologize once again for the gap between videos. I appreciate you all still being here. I won't go into too much detail, but there's some family stuff with my folks across the country that's been pretty difficult to deal with, and that's putting it lightly. And to be honest, it makes me appreciate all of you even more. In any case, if you would like to catch me live, you can find me over on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/PallyLive, where I stream either 4 or 5 days a week, depending on my mood, including tonight at around 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, doing my Trapper thing, but also playing a variety of hilariously bugged killers because, well, at this point, there's so many bugged killers, it's like playing Killer Bug Bingo. If you like what you saw here today, please feel free to hit that subscribe button, and if you think I'm worth a damn, you can give me a like as well. Remember, you guys are awesome. I promise the next video will come sooner than this one did. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Pally, and I will see you in the next one.